If you've been watching my streams recently, you're probably wondering why I've been stocking up so many Queen cores and Matriarch cores. The reason for it is I want to figure out exactly what the purpose of these legendary weapons are. To me, it makes absolutely no sense that the developers have made the rarest weapons seem pretty terrible. In my first test video, the Equalizer and Jupiter just didn't really do that good in PvP combat at all, and the Aphelion was kind of like similar to a Renegade. That didn't really make much sense to me. I know the weapon balancing in this game is a little strange, with most common guns being able to rival the purple rarity weapons. Things are definitely a little bit out of tune, but I just couldn't quite help crafting as many of these weapons as I could to get a real good understanding of exactly what they're useful for. And today I can confirm these weapons are actually pretty special and actually really useful in the right circumstances. Let's start with the Equalizer, which I think a lot of people are aware of at this point. Against normal arc, it's pretty bad. Against players, it's also equally terrible. You may as well be using a Stitcher. Against the larger arc like the Bastion and Bombardier, it also feels like you're doing hardly anything to scratch the surface, despite the weapon saying it's got very strong arc armor penetration. But then you take it against the Queen and the Matriarch and something really interesting happens. In just one energy clip, which is extremely easy to craft, you're able to break off the armor for any of the big arc, exposing their weakest points. Now you can follow that up with the Equalizer to do more damage straight to the core, or use pretty much any other weapon at this point to do damage to these bigger arc. The Equalizer literally equalizes the playing field by completely removing arc armor in seconds. What's really interesting about this is it exposes the arc armor penetration system for more than what we may have first thought. To begin with, everyone believed that arc armor penetration simply ignores a percent of the arc armor, allowing the weapon to do more damage against arc. And I do think that is true. However, the Equalizer shows us that arc armor penetration also deals straight damage to the arc armor. And it's not based on a damage value. Instead, it seems to be more based on a per shot value. So when you take an Equalizer, which is a light machine gun, which can output 50 bullets in a really short time with very strong arc armor penetration, you basically get the results of being able to destroy and rip off arc armor incredibly quickly. The Jupiter also has very strong arc armor penetration, but when you fire that against the larger arc, it doesn't rip off in the same way, and it almost feels pretty useless. In fact, if you were to take in just an Equalizer with enough ammo, you could basically solo a Queen or a Matriarch without the Equalizer running out of durability. The Jupiter, you absolutely cannot do that. Despite both weapons having very strong arc armor penetration, the way they actually work is completely different. Whilst the Equalizer shreds through armor with ease, the Jupiter basically bypasses it for real, going straight through the armor and dealing damage to whatever is in the Jupiter's path. Now, this might be obvious to some, but that means you can aim directly at the core of each arc and do ridiculous amounts of damage. Trouble is, against the Queen and Matriarch, who have large cores right in the middle underneath their very thick armor plating, the Jupiter just doesn't put out enough damage quick enough, and it ends up getting destroyed before you could even kill a Queen or Matriarch. So what's the point? Well, obviously the Equalizer was built to equalize the playing field against the biggest arc, and the Jupiter comes into play when you're dealing with slightly weaker arc. The Bastion and Bombardier both have the same cores that the Matriarch and Queen have, and if you use the Jupiter to aim right at those cores, you can take down the Bastion and Bombardier very effectively, and more importantly, very cheaply. The amount of ammo I'm using here to take down the Bastion is quite impressive when you consider how much ammo a Hullcracker would need to take it down. It's also far quicker than pretty much any other weapon out there at this point. Now, the sad truth about both the Jupiter and Equalizer is it is a PvP magnet. As soon as you use these weapons, people come running at you like crazy. And it's because everyone's got gear fear surrounding these weapons, because they've got a shiny legendary tag on them, which I find quite funny in a way. To craft either the Jupiter or the Equalizer, all you need is 3 magnetic accelerators, a Queen reactor, and 3 complex gun parts. Magnetic accelerators drop like crazy on the new Stellar Montes map, and also drop in Queen legs and Matriarch legs. But what's interesting the most about these is that you'll just stack up so many of them and won't know what to do with them. Despite them being an epic rarity material, you don't use them to craft the lower value weapons. So you end up sitting on tons of these. So even though they're epic rarity, truthfully, the value of these is pretty low because they're so easy to come by and don't have much crafting value. The complex gun parts are the same. If you loot a bunch of security lockers, you're going to build up a nice stash of complex gun parts. And they aren't very good for anything besides crafting the higher rarity weapons. If you want to make a Hullcracker and fully max it out, you need heavy gun parts. In fact, in total, to get the Hullcracker 4, which is going to get you faster fire rate, which in my opinion is really important to get this weapon ready to go and fight against Ark as efficiently as possible, you're going to need 9 heavy gun parts. Whereas crafting a single legendary weapon just requires 3 complex gun parts. And to really run it home here, these heavy gun parts are the same ones you're going to need to upgrade a lot of the other weapons like the El Toro and the Anvil, some of the weapons that you're going to be using more frequently. So whilst it feels cheap to craft a Hullcracker, the truth is you're using the same materials that you would absolutely need for a lot of the gear that you're using for PvP and just day-to-day raids. And if you want to craft the Hullcracker ammo, you're also competing with the same materials required to craft wolf packs and other explosives. So what I'm getting at here is the amount of materials that you need to craft the legendary weapons isn't as crazy as you first think, because these legendary materials aren't used for anything else that you're going to be constantly going through on a day-to-day basis. Which means, in a way, for someone like me who's now been able to farm the Queen and Matriarch quite effectively, whether I've got a hairpin or a pharaoh, I feel pretty comfortable going in and farming queens without much problem. And for those that struggle to fight a queen or matriarch, I've made a couple videos explaining how you can farm the materials by just running in with a pharaoh and just a tiny bit of ammo. You don't need to kill the queen or the matriarch, you just need to break off their legs and loot those. The harvester to get the blueprints for both the Equalizer and Jupiter can also be done with relatively little danger against the Ark, if you just be a bit patient getting into the harvester for the first time. So essentially, getting these legendary tier weapons is not that difficult. So not only is it cheaper to craft the weapons late game, the ammo is cheaper, it takes up less inventory space, and they're much better at taking down their respective Ark, right? The Equalizer will take down the big Arks really quickly, at least in comparison to the Hullcracker or any other weapon. The Jupiter will take down the Bastion and Bombardiers really easy, and even the Rocketeer as well. I just hope one day we've realized that these legendary weapons aren't quite as legendary and special as people think they are, so that people kind of lose a bit of gear fear. It's quite funny, really. People are less likely to kill you if you're holding a Hullcracker, even though you'd be an easy player to kill because the Hullcracker does almost no damage to players. But when it comes to finding a player with an Equalizer or a Jupiter, they'll be happy to betray you and take it off your hands, even though right now I'm sitting on far more Equalizers, Jupiters, and Aphelions than I ever could with Hullcrackers. That's because, once again, the Hullcracker is competing for those same resources that I need for my Anvil, my El Toro, and any other weapon that I'm using on my day-to-day raids. So yeah, the Jupiter is amazing for taking down the Bombardier and Bastion, far more cost-effective. The Equalizer is extremely cost-effective at taking down the Matriarch and Queen. Now, what about the Aphelion? Well, this one I'm still scratching my head about, to be honest. I've tested it quite a little bit, and it has a unique feature. It has extremely high velocity energy rounds, which means it can knock a flying Ark out of the sky and also slow or stall the Rocketeer. What that basically means is if you start firing at the Rocketeer first and just keep firing at the thrusters, it's not going to have enough time to stabilize itself to be able to fire rockets at you. Truthfully though, even though that feature's pretty cool, it's still less efficient than the Hullcracker to take it down in terms of time, and a lot less effective at taking down the Rocketeer than the Jupiter in terms of ammo and energy efficiency. So the Aphelion's a bit of a weird one, and I feel like there's still some things I'm missing here with this one. Either way, it's very clear to me that the legendary weapons are the absolute best at taking down each Ark in the game. You just have to know which legendary weapon is for which Ark, and be prepared with a loadout to go in so that you've got a good PvP weapon as your secondary. Late game, it becomes extremely easy to get all of the resources you need just by taking down Queens, Matriarchs, Bastions, Bombardiers, and Rocketeers super efficiently just by taking in a tiny bit of energy ammo and a Jupiter or Equalizer. But yeah, the biggest threat is just other players, because as soon as you shoot these things, people will come running because there's a strange gear fear about it. And if you do struggle to get either of these weapons, I'd highly recommend you watch my Pharaoh video where we managed to farm the Queen and craft these things without ever having to really take in anything of value at all. So I really do hope that players start to be a little bit less scared of taking these weapons on, because at the end of the day, they are the most efficient ways of taking down the Ark and much cheaper to use than the Hullcracker. Hopefully this video has got your head scratching a little bit and made you think a little bit more about the best ways to take down the Ark in Ark Raiders.